to the DataStack show. Today, we're going to talk with Kaycee from Promethium, and really interesting background. And I'm always interested, Kostas, by talking to people who build technology based on not just sort of seeing like a market opportunity maybe, or, thinking of a cool technology, but who have worked in context around the problem and just repeatedly experienced different kinds of pain that relate to the same problem. And that's what Kaycee experienced, and that's why he built Promethium. I'm really interested to ask Kaycee about he talks a lot about, in just some of his blogs and other materials, like analytics are pretty difficult, even though we live in an age of like modern tooling. And I want to ask him why that is. I think it's something that, different people in different roles and companies feel different pain around. But it can be kind of hard to articulate, like, why are analytics still actually pretty hard, and why are they huge projects, even at, mid-sized companies? So anyways, that's my question.
I think it's a great opportunity to learn more about a new term, which is data fabric. So I'd love to learn more about it and put some context around it, like why we need the new term and what it means and how it relates to the rest of the technologies that we use. And also revisit an older term, which I have the feeling that it is related to the data fabric, and that's the data catalog. We have talked about like many different, let's say, data management, data governance related tools so far. I think data cataloging is not something that we have touched that much.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Although I think it's quite important. And I'd love to hear from Kaycee about the data catalog, how it's used, why it's used, and its evolution into the data fabric.
All right, well, let's dive in and talk with Kaycee.
Let's do it.
Kaycee, welcome to the DataStack show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All righty, well, let's start where we always do. I'd love to hear about your background and then what led you to Promethium.
Yeah, thanks. So my background, a little bit mixed. Got a little bit of go-to-market as well as product, as well as financial analysis, kind of all mixed in. And it probably explains how I got into the data management space and how I became a founder of a data analytics company. So I started my career actually as a business and data analyst, the guy crunching numbers, getting insights. And as I like to say, the guy getting yelled at by my executives for always taking too long with those insights. Which led me to, do everything from take a SQL class and learn how ETLs work and why data warehouses were structured the way they were, and why I couldn't get a data mart refresh every minute, and why it had to be every 3 months. So my journey kind of led from there into being more on the go-to-market side with sales, business development, marketing, and then eventually got into product management. And 20 years later, after being an analyst, I somehow ended up as president and CEO of a data catalog company selling data management tools. And one of the things I realized when doing that was that the problem not only didn't go away, it actually got a lot worse in 20 years. So when I was a young guy, crunching numbers, I was lucky enough to have one data warehouse and one BI tool. And most customers we talk to today, unfortunately, for them to be competitive and leverage their data, they have to get data from multiple databases, SaaS applications, data warehouse, data lakes, multiple clouds. And to make it all worse, they can't even standardize on a single BI tool, right? And so this is a challenge that I saw a lot in my old job as president and CEO of Waterline Data. And it led me to want to find a way where, gosh, can we just make analytics easy for people, please? And can we make it so that way it doesn't matter what type of data source you have, it doesn't matter what type of BI tool you have, can we actually streamline this process so that way you don't pay a tax just to try and use your data? And that's been sort of the where I exercise the product management background in me, as well as kind of the go-to-market in terms of figuring out that product market fit and how do you actually deliver a product that hasn't been built before? Because the old way was simply creating more of the same problems over and over again.
Definitely. Okay, I have to, so many questions there, but I have to ask a question. So I snuck around on your LinkedIn.
Yes.
I noticed that early in your career, you were an analyst at the Federal Reserve.
Guilty as charged.
So I'm just interested to know, what did you work on? Like, what types of problems you're trying to solve? And then did you discover anything like that really interested you or surprised you in that role?
I'm not sure I'm at liberty to say, Eric. No, I'm kidding. So what wasn't that exciting? Trust me. No, it's you know, we work for the Fed. You actually do a lot of macroeconomic analysis, right? Looking at housing trends and you know, big trends, stuff like that. Specifically, I was also looking at, you know, things that were affecting the banking landscape, like things that were driving M&A, regulations, you know, how some of those regulations kind of can, you know, monitor and enforce the monetary policies. So I would say, you know, that was kind of the day job. I was in the statistics department, so I was doing a lot of number crunching. Believe it or not, in my spare time, I realized, you know, someone should actually build a database of all the different M&A activity that's happening. And so I actually found time to actually do that. And that's where I kind of really got interested in the whole.
No way.
Yeah, I know. It's, you know, when you work for the government, you actually have a lot of time, surprisingly.
You mean it's not like that as the founder of a venture-backed startup? That's so interesting.
I don't know what you're talking about. Don't know what you're talking about.
Thank you for entertaining me. Okay. I want to dig into a question. I think, you know, you said analytics is hard, and people experience that in so many different ways, right? I mean, on sort of I'll use a marketing example, you know, because I'm a marketer by trade, but it's like, okay, I'm just trying to get like these events into Google Analytics and get my Google Analytics accurate, you know, and it's like, okay, well, that's painful, right? But then on the other end of the spectrum, it's like, okay, I have, you know, legacy systems, I have new systems, I have multiple lines of business, I have, you know, all this sort of stuff, right? And it's really fragmented.
Yeah.
Could you help us understand what, like, from your perspective, why is analytics hard? And I agree with you. Like, it seems crazy that it's still hard today because the tooling has gotten, like, the different tools have gotten way better in many ways, but it is still hard for sure.
It is. You know, I look at it in a couple of different ways. One way I looked at it is that, so the analytics landscape has kind of changed a lot as we morph from, like, everyone just put everything right first in their databases, and they said, hey, don't do it in database, put in your data warehouse. And then from there, right, you had new paradigms, right, with data lakes, with Hadoop, and then with cloud and so forth. And that's okay. Like, I feel like, okay, those are shifts that we can deal with, right? The thing that made it worse, in my opinion, is, you know, the vendors, these damn vendors who make data management tools. If you look, it's kind of crazy, right? It's like, hey, I'm only going to do this piece of the whole data management process, and I'm only going to do it for this platform, for this type of data. Right. And I don't know who started that trend, but, like, it became vogue to start doing that. Like, well, hey, if those guys can only do it for RDBMS, I'm going to do it for HDFS, or I'm going to do it for time series, or, you know, I'm going to do it for, you know, whatever, just data on AWS. So I think the challenge has been a lot of the data management tools only do part of the workflow and only address part of the environment or part of a data type. Now, that may not be so bad if you never, ever change your data infrastructure. So if you said, I'm forever this cloud, this environment, this data warehouse, awesome. The problem is that never happens, right? It's every day there's a fatter, newer data warehouse, data lake, some SaaS application out there. And I've never seen IT say, we're going to keep what we have. Like, we're never going to innovate and get something new. The problem is, once a business unit starts consuming analytics, consuming reports, and it starts getting operationalized, good luck telling someone you're going to shut that down as you buy something new. Never happens, right? It never happens. You end up keeping it, and then you say, oh, for the new stuff, I'm going to, you know, move it on to the newer platform. And so what happens is you end up having to support the legacy data management tools on top of the legacy, analytics structure and so forth. And so this is where it gets hard. And then to make it worse, the knowledge of the human being doesn't necessarily go back 30 years, right? Especially the tech knowledge, right? So today's grad, if you threw a mainframe at them, they'll kind of look at you funny, like, what are you doing? Why are you giving me this, right? So, and the tech stack is moving so quickly. So I also find that it's also very hard for data teams to even do this. And so this is why it's become super challenging. And then the last part, the nail on the coffin is, I think, 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was okay to make data-driven decisions once in a while, right? And that was kind of the norm. But I think companies have shown us that, hey, if you can be data-driven, like Amazon, like Facebook, like the Googles of the world, you can go out and really kick butt and do really, really well. And so as companies now realize, I have to be data-driven, right? And you look at the pandemic, it's actually kind of kid taught us a lesson. You can't make a decision in 3 months. You ain't gonna be around in 3 months.
Yeah.
So it's forced people now into this mad rush of, oh my gosh, I have to somehow make it work with all this legacy disparate stuff I have to deal with and the knowledge gap that I have. So I think that, in my opinion, is one of the leading factors of why things are as hard as they are today.
Mm-hmm. Kaycee, can we started the conversation and you used the term data management a few times. And
because I'm old.
Well, with age also wisdom. There's also wisdom there. So I would say you're wise, but can we?
Too kind.
Can we spend some time defining what data management is based on your experience so far? Because I feel like one of the not exactly problems, but something that's very interesting with this industry is that we use a lot of different terms and the semantics are not that very clear. Everyone is has a slightly different meaning on how we use it.
Drives me nuts. Drives me absolutely nuts. I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. So what is data management?
How would I define data management? Okay. My high level definition of data management is all the stuff you do after the data lands in the database, data warehouse, data lake. So after it lands, the write has been committed. It's all the stuff that you do to get the insights. That's kind of my rough overview definition of data management, right? And so it is the ETL process, it is the data cataloging process, it is the prep, it is the modeling, it is the query optimization, query federation, the SQL, the process, and even to some extent the visualization process, right? But I would say it's I think the hard part when people have a negative reaction to the word data management or a strong visceral reaction to data management, it's because they're reliving some traumatic events that they used to experience through those processes that I just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Is there a minimum set of, let's say, activities that every company needs to have? I mean, I would assume that, okay, if you would like to consume data, some kind of visualization tool, it's going to be neat, right? Or a database system, obviously. What's in your experiences let's say this, let's name it the minimum viable data stack, right?
Yeah.
How do you like?
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to start at the two ends, right? The first end is basically where the data originates, right? So this is SaaS applications, RDBMS, etc., the data sources, and I would include data lake and data warehouse there. I know, yes, you pull data and put it in there, but for the purpose of analytics, I kind of think of data sources as anything that stores, houses, or generates data, right? So I kind of put that in one end, and then at the end of the stack, on the other end, is your typical BI tool visualization, but that's even evolved, right? I would say the last few years we've gone beyond that to the dashboard isn't enough anymore. People want narration, people want storytelling, people there's this trend that, hey, maybe I don't want to have to go look at a dashboard every single time and figure out what's going on. Maybe I just want you to tell me. Maybe I want the tool to tell me this is what I should care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I would say, let's call that the insight part for the moment, right? And so, for the most part, every organization has somewhat figured that out, right? They figured out where the data is coming from, where it's stored. They figured out kind of how to visualize it, for the most part. Anything in between, I think that's where it gets messy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen everything from like data scientists and data engineers doing crazy Python and extraction with R and Scala, to cobbled up bespoke solutions that you may have had 3 SIs over 20 years come in and build for you. I think the best practice has been to put in different data management tools, like you might have a data catalog for discovery, for governance. You might have a tool to do prep modeling. Obviously an ETL or a pipelining tool to get the data into a data warehouse or somewhere else. And from there, it's we've also seen kind of things like data virtualization technologies as well. So I would say for the most part, right, I would classify it as you have your discovery and governance layer, right? You have your prep modeling layer, and you have your, I'll call it access layer. And the access is what I would lump ETL, what I would lump the moving of the data, the pipeline data, as well as the query of the data. Mm-hmm. I would lump virtualization there as well. So I would say these are the 3 broad categories, right? In the middle of the data sources and the BI visualization and analytics tools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And okay, I have another question for another term you just mentioned, and that's like data virtualization. So
yes,
what's that?
Wow. How much time do we have? I mean, there's like that term is so misused. Like, the storage guys have a definition for data virtualization. I'm sure the virtualization, the VMware guys have a different definition, and then there's data virtualization in more the data management space, right? It's been around since like Cisco had a version of that a while back. Popular ones, Dremio, Starburst obviously talks about that. So I'll talk about the more recent as well as the more relevant to analytics, definition, and that is really the ability to use a layer to allow you to have virtual access to the data sources, where you don't have to do the ETL first. You don't have to load the data first before you can query it, and being able to also do federated queries, because if you look at something like Starburst, you actually abstract out the SQL query execution engine, right? So away from the underlying data sources. So when you can do that, then you can actually push a lot of the operations like joins, aggregation, so forth, away from the underlying data sources. And you can actually do parallel processing or the SQL execution, so you can get better performance. But it also means it is now possible to actually run the query where you're joining data from multiple sources, which before that we would never think about that, right? We would say, oh my gosh, no way, I have to do the ETL, transform everything, land it into one single data warehouse and do that. So I think, when I say data virtualization, I'm really talking about kind of the more recent incarnations, data virtualization, right? A la Dremio, a la Starburst, those type of technologies.
Do you see, and I'm assuming, let's say, the role of like a data engineer who is like pretty new in this discipline. I hear you describing, let's say, this data stack, and you mentioned both data virtualization and also ETL. But when I hear you like describing virtualization, like it makes me feel like we don't really need ETL, right? If we have, let's say, I don't know, like an ideal virtualization layer there. Yeah. So how do you see like the relationship there between the two? And I want to ask you to give me like a definition that's like as pragmatic as possible, right? Like, what do you think at the end is possible out there? Are we going to kick out like ETL and kill it or not?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, Kostas, because I think my thinking actually has evolved, right? I would say 2 years ago, I was probably, if you had a video of me somewhere, I was probably out there protesting with a sign, death to ETL, no ETL. We've got data virtualization, networks are fast, CPU memory on servers are good enough, we don't need it. Well, I have to say, in the last year or so, I've had to change my mind, and it comes from just practical experience with customers, right? So I'll tell you what I mean. So I think data virtualization is fantastic when you're exploring, when it's ad hoc, when you have an idea, you're not sure yet. What data virtualization allows you to do is get you a quick way to validate, is this the data you're looking for? Will it answer your questions? Without waiting for the complex task, waiting for the data to be loaded and so forth. So that's awesome, right? The harsh reality is that physics exists, right? I love my brothers at Starburst, right? And all the data virtualization companies. But when you get into a customer environment and they say, hey, I've got 12 billion rows across these two tables, one's in the cloud and one's an on-prem Postgres database, and I need you to do this, join this query, and I don't want it to take more than a minute. Like physics, man. Like, look, man, it just, no matter how many nodes they add, how much memory, like there's still that extra hop that you're going to take, right? And so what I've kind of changed my thinking, as I've seen in the customers' deployments, is the data virtualization is a good way to start off with if it's an ad hoc stuff. But when you're talking about operational pipeline, operational jobs, operational analytics, and you have SLAs to meet in terms of time, and in a big data sets, you're not going to win versus a dedicated query, right? You're just not going to win, especially if it's against the data warehouse that is really tricked out and has and the data engineers know exactly how to tune it for performance. And so this is where I do see them, coexisting, right? I don't see it as a replacement and say, hey, look, like the best practice I always tell our customers is use the data virtualization, make sure this is what you want very quickly. And then if this is what you want, build the pipeline, right? But now you have full confidence that this pipeline is actually going to deliver you exactly what you want, which is a lot better than before you trial and error with the ETL, the complex pipeline, right? Only have it break multiple times before you figure out, this is the one that you want. So it actually is a nice marriage. And I actually think that is a good way to actually combine the two technologies to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Where do you think that like a company should start from? Let's say you have like a medium-sized or like small company that's at the point where they want to start implementing some kind of data initiative and build their data warehouse, blah, blah, like all that stuff. Yeah. Where should they invest first? Is it ETL or virtualization or both?
Yeah, and this is where I'm going to be a little controversial because I know I'm going to say is you're never going to find in any book or manual that you read out there, right? I know every book, manual, or consultant you talk to is going to say start the data warehouse, start the data lake, move everything into one single place so you can find everything. That's what everyone is going to tell you, and that is the current quote unquote conventional wisdom, right? The problem with that approach that we've seen time and time again is two problems. One, take it from an old infrastructure guy. Moving data sucks. It's hard. It's complex. Things break. So you're gonna have to have a long project that probably won't even finish on time. After you actually build the data warehouse and data lake. Two, take it from an X catalog guy. Whatever you just moved in there, you're probably not gonna be able to find 80% of that stuff. So your users are now, really mad at you for the next 18 months why they can't leverage data beforehand. Yeah. So this is where conventional wisdom breaks. And look, it was relevant 20 years ago when you didn't have that many different data sources. It's gotten that much data. But when you now have, millions of billions and tens of billions of table and multiple data sources and types into a single place, this is just the problem you're going to run into. And so my suggestion is don't start with that, right? Do that last. Right? Actually start with, if you can, a data discovery process, right? And data discovery process meaning, and some will use a catalog, but it doesn't have to be, but a way to which where your data assets are, number one. And when I say data assets, I mean the whole gamut, right? I mean tables, views, and queries, right? Start with knowing what you have, where it is, and then start with knowing what people are actually using. So you have a way to actually prioritize, because a lot of people, when they think about doing these type of data lake, data migration, data warehouse migrations, they think they have to move everything. And I can tell you, nobody uses every single table. Nobody actually uses every single query. In fact, most people have a lot of orphan queries, stale queries, or even stale ETL jobs, or stale tables. Start with the ones that people actually care about and people are actually using, and use that as a basis to say, okay, if this is what we want, this is what we want, let's really make sure we know how to optimize that from a discovery, governance, and performance perspective. Yeah. And if you can do that, and you know people are going to use it, then actually building your data lake or data warehouse first with that set of data is going to give you the best experience. It's going to give you the fastest experience of getting that data lake, data warehouse up and running, and your customers are actually really happy with you because they're not waiting 18 months for you to tell them, okay, it's ready to use. So I would say start with that discovery process, right, to rationalize what you have and where it is and why people are using it, which are the most popular ones. Then, from there, like I said, the data virtualization is great for you to validate. And then having a data warehouse or data lake for that fast local performance comes in next. So that's kind of the 3 steps that I would recommend.
Kaycee, question on that. So this is such an interesting topic. So you talked a lot in the context of, okay, you kind of already have these disaggregated sources, and the go-to conventional wisdom today is just get everything collected into a warehouse or a data lake. Let's just imagine a world where you can start over from scratch, right? You don't have which I know, entertain me here, but
crazy talk, man. Crazy talk.
Yeah. But let's say you were starting out and you didn't have to deal with, sort of this legacy, sort of integration debt and technical debt, from a Frankenstein stack and all that sort of stuff. Would that change the way that you approach, sort of augment or building out or sort of, scaffolding the analytics, infrastructure and practice inside of a company?
Temporarily, yes. And why I say temporarily yes is I've seen many examples where people say, hey, we're building it from scratch. The problem is, where does the data come from, right? And there's only so much of it you can control for that's your internal data, right? The minute a business starts expanding, we have to take on new partnerships. Oh, hey, look, their data is from another source and they have to pipe that to us. The minute marketing starts going, hey, I actually need this type of third-party data. I need social media feeds. There's new data being added, right? And what happens is, this is just a cycle that has played itself out over and over again. Is you can probably get that started for like your core main app, your production data. And the minute someone says, we're growing as a company, we're coming out with a new line of business, it's a new app, someone there in the IT and or development stack goes, well, I don't want to be on the same stack as yours. No way, man. I want independence to be able to do my own thing. So what happens is it's a temporary solution where you get to say, I'm going to redesign from scratch. Eventually you get into the world of, oh my gosh, I do have data in multiple places. Sure, they might be newer systems, right? You could say, hey, all my data are now all cloud data platforms and data warehouses. But they're still separate formats. They're still separate APIs you got to connect to. And if you try to do cross-source analytics, you're still going to run into the problem that I just talked about.
For sure.
So
for sure.
Temporary, and you could be living in bliss for a little bit, but eventually you got to pay the piper, man.
Yeah, it's like you start a new job and like your calendar's empty and your inbox is empty and you're like, wow, I have so much time just to work on stuff. And then, 2 or 3 weeks later, the train is off the tracks. Okay. I'd love to hear, so we've talked a ton about the problem. This has been super helpful. How do you solve some or all of those types of issues with Promethium, and how does the product do it? Like, what's your approach?
Yeah. Well, number one, I would say, whatever you think you figured out, there's nothing more humbling than actually going out to customers and getting kicked in the face. And so we've had the luxury of getting kicked many times. I used to be much better looking, but
you have some aggressive customers.
Have you worked with data engineers? No, I'm kidding. No, it's all good. I think what you think you can do in the real world is always very different, right? And so one of the things that we realized very early on was you got to connect to every data source out there for the most part, right? You get just assume every customer you're going to walk into that has this problem probably has a smattering of relational data sources, data lakes, data warehouses, cloud, Hadoop, you name it, times 2, right? They just assume that's going to happen. So right off the bat, that means you do have to know how to connect everything very quickly. And when I say connect, I actually mean being able to figure out what they have and being able to show people what they have very quickly. So the old way of, well, I'm going to load everything into me. Hey, I'm going to connect, but I'm going to copy everything into me. Well, that's a horrible idea, right? Because you're now actually creating yet another data silo. And number 2, the performance impact to actually go scan every system to do that, it's god awful. So some of the earlier versions of data catalogs went through that problem. And I can tell you, a lot of times they would take 6 months to just finish scanning, right? By which time you're now behind by 6 months. So Promethium, we've actually figured out not only how to connect, but how to very quickly, within minutes, kind of give you a logical view of every table, every query, every view that you have. And then you got to figure out when you deal with enterprises that not everyone's a good citizen, not everyone puts all their data in the databases and data warehouse. So you have to figure out how to get them for Git repos. I kid you not, right? And being able to do the same thing. So just in the ability to connect and kind of give you this normalized view is one way that Promethium can do. And literally in minutes, in literally one day, we've had customers tell us that you've shown me in 15 minutes what my existing legacy data catalog guys took a year and a half to show, right? So get that global visibility in one day very quickly. Then the next thing you need to do is help them understand the meaning behind the data and what it can be used. I think this is where some of the drawbacks of a lot of data catalogs have is they can tell you the metadata information and so forth, but is that really that helpful if I'm trying to know, can I use this table to answer a specific question, right? Or is it more helpful if I tell you this table has been used to answer these 5 questions that are actually very similar to the one that you're asking? So that ability to actually extract context and how it's actually being used is super important. And then the last part that I think is even more important is the ability to actually let you use the data. So a lot of the metadata tools, they're only metadata only, or if they do have some quote unquote preview, it's very light. It's a small subset, and you have to move data for them to preview, or you have to pay huge tax. So this is where Promethium has actually figured out a very lightweight view of actually seeing what's inside, previewing it, but then as and when you need, let you actually work with the data, right? Actually let you join, let you build queries, let you build visualization very quickly on the fly. And that's a whole different experience, because before what people are used to is, I found it, I need to use it, let me go call someone else. And let's hope they have access to it, and let's hope they can get it from me. Let's hope that they validate it. Or I can't find it, it hasn't been built. Crap, I can't do it. Let me go get someone else to do it. And so, being able to actually do that all the way through is where Promethium shines. And then the part that I think a lot of folks overlook is you have to make this into a seamless workflow, because today these all exist as separate processes, potentially done by separate people using separate tools. Right? I don't naturally assume what I find in my catalog, what I don't find, I can instantly build on the fly, query, virtualize. That doesn't exist today normally. And so how do you make that not just easy and clear and intuitive, but also performance, right? You got to make sure that it performs as fast, so that, for us, our goal has always been get to the answer in 3 minutes, right? Try as hard as you can, get through, have a single easy workflow, but get to the answer in 3 minutes. And what we found is with analytics, you don't necessarily need to answer the question right away, right? With analytics, the way, when I was an analyst, most oftentimes, whatever you think you're going to answer, it actually wasn't what you're going to answer until you start working the data. And we look at the data, you're like, ooh, hey, I didn't think about that. Or, ooh, wait a minute, there's something else. Or, wow, this was wrong. And so the faster you can get to those points of iteration, as I call it, the better your analysis will be. The longer it takes, this is where things start getting hairy, right? This is where you're like, oh, maybe I can convince my boss to just accept this. Or I was going to tell them, let's use the data from 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So those are the things that Promethium can actually help, is not only giving you that fast connection understanding, but actually allow you to actually work with it all in a single platform with end-to-end collaboration between the business person and the data teams. Because here's the thing, as a data analyst, I have no idea what the marketing guy really is going to do with it until the very end, right? And as the marketing guy, you have no idea how to do the gnarly extractions, right? And pull the data from different data sources. So why do we actually make you wait until someone finished that task, only for Eric to say, hey man, this ain't it. This is not what I need. Why not have them collaborate in real time together, right? And that's kind of sort of this new era of collaborative analytics that Promethium is bringing to the table.
Well, the dirty secret is that the marketing person may not know at all what they want to do anyways.
I won't tell if you won't tell.
I know Kostas has a bunch of questions. One specific question from me before I hand the mic over. You mentioned giving context to the data, right? So show me everything that I have, right? Which is really useful. I mean, goodness gracious, like even in small companies like ours, it's like there's nooks and crannies already in the warehouse,
Right, exactly.
So that's helpful. And then you talked about, this table has been used to answer 5 other questions like this one.
Yeah.
That on the surface feels like there's a very high level of subjectivity and like context there. How do you do that? I mean, are you like, sort of diffing SQL queries that have been run on the table, or like, how does that even work?
Wow, how much time do you have? This is actually part of the secret sauce, right, of Promethium, and one that we actually have a patent on is, so we figure out kind of both ways. One is, how do you actually figure out the semantic and also the context, right, of a query or a table, right? How do you figure out the relationship it has with other tables and other queries? And then, because you also have to, it's almost kind of like understanding it from a graph perspective, right? A graph database perspective, to understand these multiple relationships could actually exist between multiple objects. And the object could be a table, it could be a query, it could be a view, right? It could be a tag, right? It could be a BI tool, right? And so figuring out how all these semantic objects actually map to each other is hard, but actually it's very useful, number one. But number two is also taking advantage of crowdsourcing, right? Knowing what people have rated, reviewed, frequency of access, those type of metrics come in play. So one of the things I learned earlier on is that very rarely can you rely on one metric to determine viability or relevance, right? Oftentimes in an organization, we look for multiple data points. We look for, has this been used by someone I trust? Number one, right? So who actually uses? Frequency, right? When was the last time it was used? How often it was used? That tends to give people a level of comfort. Crowdsourcing, right? 4 stars, thumbs up, thumbs down. Believe it or not, that gives people comfort. And then some people want to get a little deeper. They want to look at lineage. Right? Tell me what actually came from. Show me what happened. Show me the transformation actually happened, and prove that way I can get a sense of comfort how it was actually built. And so with Promethium, we actually realized, number one, every organization has multiple things they look at, and it's never just one, unfortunately, right? But what we found is that everyone probably uses the same 6 or 7 things, and they might just weigh them differently, right? And so we've actually figured out, number one, not only how to get those things, but how to actually create an algorithm to rank, right, based upon those 6 or different things in terms of relative importance, and then have it tuned. So kind of like our own little page rank, if you will, right? That kind of determines the level of act, and there's a scoring behind it. And if you don't like it, right, you vote it down. If you don't like it, you don't access it. And so it's always live. And this is where like customers have actually started seeing a lot of value because it's not static, right? The problem with data catalogs and data governance tools is it's kind of static. It's what someone says, or it's, that profile the data says, but if you don't actually know how it's actually being used and by, not just itself, but also parts of it and so forth, you don't really get a complete picture, right? And so this is where, we've been able to do this. So you don't realize it, but as you're using Promethium to answer questions and very quickly build things out, you're actually contributing to the governance as well, because you're actually contributing to one of those factors in the scoring.
Fascinating.
That's very interesting, Kaycee. I don't remember like if we talked in this show before about data catalogs. So I'm going to ask you a little bit more about it.
Yes.
Because I also understand that the cataloging process is something that is quite important in general, but also it has like a quite central, let's say, role in the product itself, if I understand correctly, right?
Yes. Yes.
So can you give us a little bit of, let's say, background about cataloging, because it's not a new term, right? Like, as you said, you worked in the past with catalogs. You had high expectations at some point in your career about catalogs. You got hurt by them, probably. You have some kind of trauma. So how did it start, how it looked like, and how it looks like today with like the innovation from Promethium? And also, if possible, talk a little bit about the future too.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, catalog started, decades ago as kind of just a way for, DBAs to, be able to annotate things and find things, right? And they heard terms like data dictionary, right? For me to, just put in little things that help me understand what this term actually means, what this column actually means. And then people started adding in things like lineage, right, to really understand kind of how because as things move from the source system into the data warehouse, transformation can take place. And so you want to understand, hey, how did the transformation happen? So lineage started becoming a big thing. And then you have things like data quality score, et cetera, that allow people to rank, trustworthiness of the data and so forth. So I would say, they all kind of started with a very heavy governance influence for data catalogs. And that's where most of them actually have that background. The one thing that most catalogs have in common is really search, right? It's really how we ask most people, why do you want a catalog? The number one reason is always search. And I would tell you that once someone's actually bought and implemented a catalog, if you ask them, hey, which feature do you actually use, right? Search and tagging is like 80 to 90%. The rest, like they kind of, and the reason is sometimes the rest is either doesn't work that well, it's hard to implement. But for the most part, I would say you get a catalog to, number one, find where things are, find where they come from, and a way to put some sort of information that helps you assess whether or not this is good or bad data. That's the high level view of kind of how catalogs usually work. And then what we find is that recently, right, people, because like I said, the problem of multiple data sources, multiple data types, and so forth, people are asking more from their catalog, right? I want to profile it, I want to see cardinality, I want to see statistics and so forth. And you can do that. Where the catalog stopped, unfortunately, was always, I'm either going to find you things that are already there. That means good data sets that you can use, right? Or I'm going to find you things that are raw tables, which you probably wouldn't know what to do with. And so a catalog never allowed you to actually build. It never allowed you to actually experiment with the data, other than saying, hey, I found it. Kostas said this is good. Eric said this is bad. They each gave it 4 stars, and it comes from this source and so forth. What happens is that the user has to make a lot of interpretations before they even know whether or not you can actually use it. And so if you look at most usage, most catalogs are being used by a data governance team, really to, quote unquote, manage whether or not something should be used, whether it poses a risk, who should access it, and so forth. And the reason why is because that next step of actually using it for analytics, which requires you to actually work with the data, it's a separate persona. It's a separate requirement that a catalog doesn't do, right? The catalogs it's like 80-90% metadata only, right? It doesn't do that building part. And so it doesn't worry about performance. It doesn't worry about scale. It doesn't worry about, can you actually answer questions and query optimization and all that stuff. So because of that, taking away the marketing, it's actually not as useful as you might think for analytics, right? Because if you can't do all that, how are you going to really help a data analyst, right? Or a data engineer determine this is the data set to use to answer a question? So that's kind of, I would say catalog circa 2017, 2018, right? And so where Promethium's gone is we realize that the most natively intuitive thing to everyone, regardless of function, regardless of creed, et cetera, is search. Nobody needs to really teach you how to use search. It's the most natural thing to use. So we didn't start out wanting to build a catalog. What we realized was almost everyone can search. Almost everyone's used to the notion of tags. Almost everyone's used to the notion of ratings and reviews. I know 4 stars means something's better than 2 stars. I know thumbs up means it's better than thumbs down, right? And so if you can leverage the catalog as an entry point or use that capability as an entry point and build on top of that. So once I find something or once I think these 5 things are what I want, then add the building part to it, right? Then figure out a way for people to prep and model, query, and see the results. Then you have a way to very quickly get most people to actually be able to work with the data, as opposed to having to stop, post-discovery and then having to go and ask someone else to use another tool. So this is where you've seen kind of the term data fabric come up. So, and I'll talk about data fabric, data pipeline, data mesh, and data catalog, right? Because they're actually not the same. But the problem is the marketing is so darn confusing, right? So right now I'm seeing a lot of catalog guys go, I'm a data fabric. Okay. So the way to think about a data fabric in terms of what it should do and what it needs to have is actually a fabric. Yes, it needs to have the ability to connect to multiple data sources. It needs to have, a catalog-like functionality of metadata extraction, metadata governance, but it actually needs to have the data modeling and access layer so you can actually use it, right? And then be able to have some sort of coordination orchestration layer of saying, this is who uses it, this is how you should use it, this is what you should do next, right? That's kind of the broad overall definition of what a data fabric is. It's Gartner's definition as well. Now we've taken that and kind of modified it a bit in the sense that we think that the access layer should be both direct and federated, right? Because if you still require people to move data, it's not going to be a good experience. And we also believe that you do need visualization because for a lot of people, that is a better way to validate whether or not this is what you're looking for or not. Yes. I challenge anyone to say, I can send you a 50-page SQL query and you can tell me this is the data that you're looking for. Yeah. Kostas, you look like a smart guy. I think you can do it. But if you gave it to me, I wouldn't be able to do it to you, my friend. Right. Yeah. But I can look at a pie chart and I can say, yeah, it's probably looking pretty good. Right. Yeah. Or the narration and the storytelling to be able to tell you and validate it. So we actually kind of go above and beyond what the standard Gartner definition of a data fabric is. Now, that means it's doing all these things that catalog is not doing. Catalog is stopping at the metadata management and discovery. It's not getting to the access layer. It's not getting prep or visualization. Now, data pipeline is just the moving of the data, right? And if you think about, my dad was an English teacher, so I probably spend way too much time analyzing words in their meetings. So a pipeline has a connotation of it's steel, it's rigid, right? Once I put it in, it's just going to move. Where fabric, it's loose, it's flexible, right? And that is because a fabric is as flexible as a question. If I ask a question, it's a wrong question, I'm going to ask another one. I'm going to iterate, I'm going to change a question. A fabric allows you to kind of on the fly very quickly change what you're looking for, very quickly build what you're looking for, and have that flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of how I think we think about the world, and data mesh. Our friends at Starburst, I know, have done a lot of work on the data mesh. I think there's a fabric and a data mesh kind of coexist together. I think a data mesh is a framework, right?
Yeah.
That encompasses a lot of things, and you can have a data fabric in the data mesh framework, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I see those things.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it makes sense. And I think we are still in the process of properly defining all these terms and understanding them. One last question from me.
Yes.
So you mentioned at some point that the data catalogs were mainly used by the data governance people in the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
After this evolution of the data catalog into the data fabric, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the people who use and consume this tool?
Yeah, so we're seeing data analysts and data engineers now actively using, kind of the data fabric to be able to automate the building of data sets, automate the building of on-demand SQL queries, so et cetera, right? I think the next evolution or the next iteration is, as you layer on no code, as you layer on NLP and NLG, a lot of business users, a lot of, right now I would say even the kind of fairly technical business analysts could also use the data fabric. But I think the goal, at least the goal I have, is how do we get the data fabric in the hands of even, the non-technical people at all, the guys that just want to ask a question and get an insight. And that's where a lot of work around NLP, NLG, and AI and free text search and so forth is really going to come to play and kind of take that to the next level. So that's the part that makes it, very, very interesting, because now the fabric can actually span, right, to layman, citizen, business folks, business analysts, data engineers, and even the governance team. And I think when you can have that, that's where things start to make sense, in that you can have governance, analytics, BI all under the same framework, which today it's a necessity, because these crazy governance rules like GDPR, CCPA, they're really hard. They're really, really hard to actually be compliant. And I can't think of a way to do it if you still live in the siloed world that most people have, where everything is, I only do this, I only do this. It's going to be a nightmare. And so I see the data fabric as, it's finally, there is a way to actually do this, to drive velocity in decision making, but also do it in a way that automatically takes care of governance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like we have more to chat about, to be honest, but I know that we are close to time here, so I'd like to allow Eric to ask any last question that he might have. So Eric, all yours.
I think we're at the buzzer. I think Brooks is telling us we have to close it down. Kaycee, this is, whenever we run long, we know that it's a topic that is not only deeply interesting and valuable to us, but also to our audience. So thanks for digging in. Thanks for letting us get a little technical. And thanks for teaching us about not only data catalog, but helping to further demystify data mesh, data fabric, and all the other terms that marketers like me proliferate across the industry. So
am I going to see a blog from you on the data mesh and data fabric now?
Oh man, I'd have to dig pretty deep for that one, but cool. Well, thank you again for your time. It's been great to have you in the show.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I had an absolute blast, so appreciate it.
Thank you, Kaycee. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
I'm glad that Kaycee let me ask him about working as an analyst at the Federal Reserve. I just had to know, and he said it was boring, which I kind of expected, but at least he built a database, in his spare time, which is pretty cool. So I'm glad he was a good sport. I was really interested by the sort of, it sounds like a system that learns about the value and context of data over time that they've built at Promethium. And I mean, it sounds like they even have a patent on it. That was pretty interesting, and is a really compelling way to think about the challenge of data governance and, sort of a self-optimizing system. And I don't know if we've talked to a guest who's brought up that approach yet, which is really interesting. So that was my thing to think about for the week.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this time I'm going to think about the same as you do. It is a bit of surprising that we haven't heard more about this ever-changing nature of data and how this impacts the things that we do, the products that we build, the infrastructure that we design, and all these things. So yeah, I think it's something very, very interesting. It's intuitively, I would say, very important. We see it, I mean, probably makes more sense to face this challenge when we are talking about data cataloging, because I mean, makes a lot of sense that this temporal nature of data like is more obvious there. But I think it's something that has a much broader impact, like with pretty much whatever we do with data and the products around it. So I think we both should keep a mental note to ask more about that, our guests from now on.
I agree. All right. Well, many more great episodes coming up. Subscribe if you haven't, and we will catch you on the next show.